Southwestern family of companies welcomes you to the Action Catalyst. With each episode, our diverse and amazingly accomplished guests share their insights and inspirations to help us ignite our own. So let's invest attention, together, to breathe, to reflect, and refocus, and decisively defeat that voice that we call Mr. Mediocrity. Then let's enjoy moving forward to make a positive difference in our world.
Welcome to the Action Catalyst. Today, we're talking to Siimon Sander. Siimon runs a portfolio of profitable internet businesses, including About Hire, Oscar Hamilton, PodcastWise, and Why Charlie. Originally from Estonia, Siimon also invests in early-stage tech companies on the side and has hosted his own podcast, Entrepreneur Decoded, which was #1 in several countries upon its debut. Siimon, welcome.
Thank you.
You've called Estonia home your whole life. Is that right?
Yeah, I was born in Tallinn, Estonia. It's a country of 1.4 million people. And yeah, I was born there, but after high school, I ended up getting a ride in, American college. And I've been kind of going between US and Estonia for the past, decade now. But I still love going back. Once a year, I usually go back, see friends and family, but I don't have too many connections back there anymore.
What's your #1 secret for dealing with the time change?
I think body takes 1 hour for they adjust in time zones. So, Central time zone and the Estonian time zone is 8 hours difference. So usually, 8 to 10 days, just giving your body a bit of time and, not rushing it, but also building a company that is able to, operate without you. And well, you don't have to be, meetings at, specific times or, waking up at odd hours. I think that has been crucial.
So 1.4 million people in Estonia came to the US for university. Were you always inspired to get into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I got into college. Somehow I got in. So I went to this college called St. Olaf College in Minnesota. It's a rather small school of, 3,000 people. And I quickly realized I'm surrounded by high performers. And, I was this high school kid who wasn't necessarily a great student, but somehow I got into this rather fancy American school. And, when you're surrounded by high performance, whether it's university or, a company, either, you sink or swim. And I kind of decided, I'm going to give this a shot and, do my best. Somehow I managed, but academics never really interested me as much. So my sophomore year, I kind of decided to take a leap and start my podcast. And needless to say, you can probably hear my odd accent 6-7 years ago. It was even worse. So you can imagine it wasn't the best podcast to start with, but it was an interesting era of podcasting because back then it wasn't as mainstream and, cool and sexy as it is today. But cool thing about podcasting back then was you could get almost anybody to be a guest on your show. So, I was able to interview some of my, back then heroes, Mark Manson, the self-help writer who, became a New York Times bestseller, and, all these other guys and also women that I wasn't, never able to connect with back then. And I ended up sticking with it for 200 episodes. And I think that's sort of the Eastern European mindset of, just put the blinders on and hopefully it sticks or hopefully it works. And then I think I became a bit more self-aware and I kind of realized, for one, I don't really enjoy doing these. And for two, I'm not very good at it. After 200 episodes, I kind of decided, let's end this and let's do something else. Throughout these 200 interviews, I was, became friends with, a dozen of guests and some of them, wanted to start a podcast. And with my kind of technical background and expertise, I was like, hey, why don't I produce and do the technical stuff for you? And I got my, first clients as a, sole entrepreneur, and I was sophomore in college. And that was kind of my leap into entrepreneurship.
Wow. So you started your own podcast. It was easy enough to actually get famous, successful.
Yeah, like really famous ones. It was pretty crazy.
Who were some of the early customers?
So obviously when you're sort of starting off on your own, you're not really resonating with big companies, Fortune 500, enterprise clients. So typically you end up working with small businesses, sole entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, authors, basically individual folks who are kind of trying to build a dent in the universe. So my first client was by the name of Andy Simon, and she is a corporate anthropologist. And she's been our client for almost 6 years or something. And it's been insane because people become your friends. It's sort of really cool to see, people succeed in the long term. When you first start up, you kind of realize, hey, maybe basically she told me, hey, I want to start a podcast. I might do it, 10, 20 episodes. And now she's been running it for 6 years. So it's really cool to see that.
Do you feel like you ever took lessons from these interviews in general that helped you apply them to building the companies that you've built?
It's an interesting question because I've been a big nerd when it comes to learning about, leadership management for my whole life. And it's so hard to kind of be self-aware about these things. Like, where did I pick up a specific piece of knowledge? Was it from a book or was it from, a conversation that we're having? But I think the biggest thing I took away from, running this podcast of 200 episodes and then, starting my own company on the side, which is, I don't think people should be as patient as they are. I think entrepreneurship and business today really glorifies, be patient, put out content for 10, 15 years and, eventually success will happen. And I strongly used to believe that, when I was younger, but I think running experiments with your personal life, but with also business, give yourself, let's say 6 weeks, give it your all. And if something doesn't work, adjust the course and do something else. I see a lot of young entrepreneurs and myself included when I was younger, spending so much time on these, side projects and, businesses that obviously weren't working. I didn't have to do 200 episodes to realize that this wasn't working. And today, we produce and work with, hundreds and hundreds of clients, including Fortune 500. We got, Robinhood Markets. We got International Monetary Fund, some of the, biggest companies in the world with tens of millions of dollars in market cap. And I kind of realized that just run an experiment for 6 weeks. If it doesn't work, move on to something else and, set yourself a goal. Do you want to build a huge company or are you comfortable with, having a sort of a lifestyle business? And that's kind of based on talking with a lot of just, on a friendly note with a lot of successful founders of these, big companies.
Yeah. We had a conversation recently with Chip Gaines. I asked Chip, when you were building, did you imagine you were going to have this huge television show and it was going to take, he was flipping houses and working on houses and his vision was mostly that. Fixer Upper came in out of left field and they grabbed it. So my question for you is, in a different way, it sounds similar. To me, obviously, you didn't have this huge vision your freshman year of college, you're going to build this podcasting empire. Yeah. When did you start to develop a vision for what this could become?
I think you made such a great point. You kind of still have to put in the reps. Instead of, doing 10,000 reps, you can maybe do 100 or 200 and then adjust the course. But when it comes to, having a vision, I've never really had a specific vision for the podcasting business. It was always I need to pay my bills. My rent was, $500 a month after college. So that was kind of my baseline. I need to make $500 and, have some money to eat and go to coffee shops to drink some coffee. So I never had that great vision. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs do. On the side, I've kind of always had the vision of I want to, one day run a public company and be a CEO of that. And that's sort of been with me ever since I was, 15, 16 years old. But when it comes to kind of on the macro level, there was never an aspiration to run a specific revenue number or specific number of, clients for Oscar Hamilton. That being said, today, how we run things is very different. Every quarter we set up specific, objectives, key results for each employee, making sure they, hit everything. But that's very different than how it used to be when it was just me.
Yeah, there's a good point in that because some people that I've spoken to, they have such blinders on with their vision that they miss opportunities that could come up in other conversations. They're so focused on one thing. How do you gauge when a project is still in alignment with what you're doing?
Yeah, I just love building side projects. I think entrepreneurs tend to do that. And it's very hard for most people to work on something for, 10, 15, 20 years. Because, you don't get those initial dopamine hits anymore when you wake up in the morning. It's kind of, everything's predictable. When I open up my Slack, when I open up my email, I know exactly what's going to happen there. Questions and the meetings I have with my team members. So you start a side project on the side that kind of makes you a bit more excited to wake up in the morning. And it sounds very depressing, but I think it's kind of the release and more positive way to cope with running a long-term business. I usually come up with an idea when I'm, just in a shower or, taking my dog out. And typically what I do is I find a general manager to run this business. I find somebody, scrappy, sort of young, usually, early 20s. It can be, in US, outside of US, and basically they're hire number one. I'll give them sort of direction where I want this idea to go. And I'll give you a, concrete example of that. So, ChatGPT is kind of exploding all over the place. And if you haven't heard of ChatGPT, it's basically this AI tool with endless possibilities that Sam Altman built. I guess he's the CEO with a huge team. I'm seeing this huge opportunity here right now because it's early days of AI, especially, you're able to ask this tool a question, for example, like write me an article on whatever, and it's going to actually give a pretty great output. This is interesting. This is sort of like when Web 2.0 was, getting popular now, with crypto 3.0, there was like a couple of years of, excitement and a lot of opportunity. So it's like, hey, I should, do something. So I came up with a blog idea. I called it whycharlie.com. And we're going to basically answer all questions starting with why. Why is sky blue? Why should I wear shoes? Why should I go outside when it's cold? Mm-hmm. And these are the questions that get answered, a couple hundred times a day or a month, I guess. And we also put together a couple of people who sort of edit these questions because the AI is not perfect. So it's going to give us an output, and then editors will go through the answers, make it better, add some references. And this is sort of a side project that I was able to take off over the weekend. I hired general manager, and general manager hired editors, writers, and then general manager reports back to me. And the max amount of time I have to spend on this, per week is probably like 2 to 5 minutes. And I'm going to give it, typically what I do is I give projects around 6 months, because with SEO, with all of that stuff, 6 weeks is too little. So 6 months to, see if it, breaks even, and hopefully, becomes a profitable business that runs its own.
So a big part of your formula is also finding the right talent, though, to support that initiative.
Yeah, I think hiring talent is probably the number one skill of entrepreneurship. I mean, entrepreneurship at the end of the day is delegation, nothing really more than that, and finding very good people who can do work better than you in specific areas in the business. And finding these people is really hard. So I'll give you an example. The chief of staff, basically, who was secondhand to me when it comes to, running the company. She runs all the operations at Oscar Hamilton. And I was just kind of overwhelmed with everything that I was doing, and I decided I need to hire somebody to help me. So I put together, a job post, chief of staff, salary rather high, top 10%, I think. And I interviewed maybe 70, 80 people, and it was really hard to find somebody. So I guess the biggest thing is make sure you have enough qualified leads in the pipeline. So if you're interviewing for any position, most entrepreneurs, interview 5, 10, 15 people, and then they pick the best possible one. Never do that. Have at least, 70, 80, some people say, 150 plus candidates in the pipeline. Second thing, don't rush it. Take some time. If you honestly feel like the person isn't a player, don't hire them. It's going to cost you in the long run. So ideally, you want to have every single person in your team who's an A player, meaning that they'll take responsibility for their work. You can tell them, accomplish this goal, and they're going to go out there and, accomplish this. Most people are unable to do that. And so if you're giving out tasks for your employees instead of goals, you probably have hired wrong people.
100%. You obviously made some great hires. What do you feel for you has been some of the biggest pivot points personally? I mean, even this year dealt with some really big health things, right?
Yeah. So I run my business very differently than I think most internet CEOs, because I prioritize my personal time, my time with my partner, my family. I like going to, brunch in the mornings. I like to take long walks with my dog. I like reading, I like going to gym. So all of this stuff takes up a lot of time. And if I was working 8 to 10 hours or 12 to 14, like most of the CEOs, I wouldn't have time, for myself. So I kind of decided 2-3 years ago when I was just overworked that, this has to stop. I very strategically thought about all functions that a company had. So let's say you run a profitable company and you're working 8 to 10 hours and you want to stop. Typical entrepreneur, does that. So write out all the functions that your company has, from accounting, collecting invoices, to sending out sales letters, to checking in with your team, one-on-one meetings, and then make a note to everything that you actually want to do. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And everything that isn't your strength and you don't enjoy doing, you need to delegate with somebody else on your team. So you have this huge list of, tasks. And typically a typical company, a small business has, 40 to 100 functions like that. At Oscar Hamilton, we have around like 70 functions that get executed each day. And for each function, you need to find the person who's going to be directly responsible for that function to make sure it gets done. You don't want to have 2 people to be in charge of a function. You want to have 1 individual responsible. So if something falls through, who's in charge of that. Mm-hmm. You also want to have a backup person and cross-train them. So in case first person gets sick, leaves the company, there's a replacement to go right away. So for example, if you have somebody on your team doing sales calls, they get sick, there's a second person, ready to take over. The third part of the puzzle is have processes and SOPs and how-to guides. Every time anybody on your team does a task, second time, they are required to write it down in a written or a video format. So for example, if I am going to collect invoices the first time, the second time I am required to write it down so I don't have to do it again. And that's sort of a common practice. So once you have all these functions, written out, you will only end up with 5 or 6 things that you actually really enjoy doing. For me personally, it's doing one-on-ones with my team, hiring, firing, and setting the strategy. That's the only thing that I do. When it comes to, sales, when it comes to accounting, when it comes to management, when it comes to sort of the micro level that happens on day-to-day in company, you can outsource or delegate 99% of that. And entrepreneurs often feel that they need to do it all, but in most of the time they don't, and they're not very good at it. So being self-aware that, hey, give yourself a bit of space and hire great people, create those task lists, give out the tasks, and keep really tight eye on processes. And all of a sudden you have all this time in your hands and you end up working, hour or two.
So Simon, I'm gonna play devil's advocate with you, not because I disagree, because I 110% agree, but I know what everybody is thinking in their head as an objection to this, and they always say, "Oh, Simon, but for me, this task only I can do it so well. Other people can't do it nearly as well as me, and if I do it, they screw it up." And this happens, right? You hire someone, they drop the ball. And the normal average entrepreneur, business owner wants to grab that responsibility back because they saw what happened when they delegated.
Yeah, it was so uncomfortable in the beginning to get this process started because I remember exactly even, delegating my email box. It sounds pretty absurd, but I had this fear in my head, what if somebody sends out an email on my behalf and messes something up? Or, there's a salesperson who does a sales call and makes us look bad. What you want to do is, number one, hire great people. Number two, give them a trial. You don't need to hire them full time. Give them 1 week trial and see how they do. And for example, number 3, don't give them all access like on day one. For example, with email, have them go through your email and grade drafts. And if they mess up, edit the drafts and make sure, next time you change the body of the email a bit. When it's same thing with sales calls, instead of having them do 200 sales calls a month, have them, start with 1 and see how they do. And even if you don't trust them to do 1 sales call, have them do like a Loom or, a one-way video interview with themselves where they have pitching a potential client. So it doesn't mean that you have to give out all responsibility at once, 100%. And I think that would be a bit foolish anyways. Very slowly adjust. And if you feel like person is performing, give them more responsibility. Start off very slow, give them, 10% of what you're doing. When it comes to the question of, hey, me personally, I can do this best. If it's actually true, good for you. And you can, and if you actually enjoy it, make sure you can keep going and doing it. But entrepreneurs tend to have a lot of biases and they think they can do everything really well. And based on my experiences, is not true at all. And I'll give an example. In the early days, I used to do sales phone calls and I thought I'm this friendly guy, I'm really good at it. And when I started listening to the sales calls that I did, I quickly realized, hey, I'm pretty horrible at it. And having a salesperson who's actually trained and knows what they're doing, it's a game changer. And the moment you make that switch in your head and you give out responsibility, number one, like your company will grow, you'll have more free time. And I guess you have to ask yourself, like, are you fine with your companies today? Or do you want to, have more free time and grow your revenue as well? And if you don't, that's completely fine. And most entrepreneurs end up working to death for the rest of their days because they don't want to make that switch of, hiring people and giving out tasks. It's really crazy.
Yeah, you nailed it. And my other line of work is doing consulting and coaching, and the things you're bringing up are things that we see are very common, as you know, and it's what holds them back. It becomes their ceiling for time. A couple of things that I really wanted to ask. One was, you have this ability, just like you're doing on this podcast, you have this ability to make it sound so simple and so easy to build all these businesses. And if we went back in time to 18-year-old you versus who you've become through this process today, it'd probably sound a little bit different. But let the listeners in a little bit. Like, what have been some of the biggest walls that you've personally hit?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me has been the concept of heroing. And the idea is basically when employees are having problems, challenges, clients are not happy. Instead of letting employees fix the problem, CEO or me jumps in and, tries to fix the situation. This is very common. And I've done that so many times, because for various different reasons. I think I like having full control of my company, of my business, and I tend to fall back to old patterns. So I constantly have to remind myself and to have that written at the top of my Notion or my to-do list every day, be a CEO, work on your business, in your business. So whenever I have an idea, let's say, make the landing page better, because I bootstrapped all of my businesses. It's very easy for me to, go to Photoshop, start playing around with it, spend the next 2 hours, coming up with a cool landing page image, and then realize, it's 2 p.m. and that's all I've accomplished today. And I have this huge team and is this time well spent? So 2 things, let your employees make mistakes. Don't jump in and give them guidance. Make sure they ask questions. A good question to ask your employees is if they're stuck, what you intend to do instead of telling them, do this, do that. So it gives them, responsibility and sort of ownership over their tasks. And second is, if you want to be a CEO, it's, you not need to act like one, because I don't think I acted like one for a very long time. So make sure you actually spend your time wisely. And, I used to track my times, and my goal was to work, 8 hours a day. That was sort of my threshold every single day. And thinking back, I kind of realized how absurd it is. 8 hours of work doesn't, mean anything if the output is the same, if I can accomplish in 30 minutes. So for years, I was religiously, I need to get 8 hours in, no matter what, if it was, Saturday, Sunday, any day. And instead of, having a specific threshold or work hours, make sure you're making progress where you want to go.
I think that's wonderful wisdom for many people. Heroing, it feels good natured. You want to help the person, you want to save the business. And so you jump in to help, but you're stealing a lesson to develop your next level of leaders. And that's part of scalability too, right?
Yeah.
Well, a couple of lightning round, and these are just quick questions, but really great for our listeners. If you were just looking at your phone, thinking of the last app that you're really excited about, what would that be?
Yeah, Notion for sure. Yeah. We run everything in Notion, all our processes, SOPs, my own to-do list, yeah. If Notion went down, I have no idea what I'd do. Okay.
Awesome. Book that you've listened to or read recently that was influential in helping you.
Yeah. This is available for free in Google Docs. It's by Matt Mockery, and it's called The Mockery Method. It's basically principles of great leadership management. And I've probably reread the thing 25 times over the last, 3 years. Goes over all the great management lessons from top tech companies from the world. And Matt is just, a fantastic guy. And, he made it available for free. I think you can get it from Amazon as well, but the Google Docs version is more updated. So I'd recommend it.
Yeah, that's a great resource. And then because you've been in the game of interviewing for 200 episodes, I feel like this is an interesting question for you. Who's a person you've always wanted to meet, but never have?
Yeah, I met all my heroes. I don't have one.
Not everybody can say that.
I think it's partly because I grew up in Estonia and I always looked into, the Estonian entrepreneurship ecosystem. I think, in US, we have these CEOs who are sort of treated as celebrities. In Estonia, it's very, very different. If your net worth is 1,000 millions or, very, very rich, you go to the same coffee shops as, everybody else, and you're not treated any differently. So, you get to meet all these people very easily. It's very different than what's happening in the US. So I don't know. I don't have any specific person that I would like to meet. I know it's a boring answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it's amazing that you've had the opportunity to meet many of those people already, which says something. I guess the last thing, and this may be a little generic, but we'd love to hear different answers. What's your morning routine? What's your morning routine during the work week?
Oh, you're going to hate me for this. Again, this is so boring. My day is so random. I work a couple hours a day. So I go to bed around, midnight, maybe 1 a.m. Last night, I was on my laptop until 6 a.m., just playing around. So typically I wake up, 10 a.m., sometimes 9 a.m. I make my coffee. I go on a long walk with my dog, typically for an hour. And I don't take any meetings typically before 1 p.m. This was, kind of the first in 5 years, which has been interesting. And I try to get all the important stuff out of the way before lunch. I do lunch, around 2 p.m. So the morning routine literally is coffee and going out to walk with my dog. I used to do, read morning pages and meditation and sort of all of that. And I felt like I was just not enjoying it as much. Maybe I need to get back to it, but I feel like I'm getting a lot done these days. Morning is my prime time. And I just really enjoy getting my coffee and, starting working after I get a bit of fresh air. So yeah, I don't have any morning routine at this point.
Appreciate the honesty. And honestly, I think we asked the question because I think it's healthy to understand that you don't have to be a morning warrior that starts at 4:30 a.m. to have built successful things and maintain growing them, right? There's a lot of different ways to find that success. I think the underpinning of a lot of this conversation has been, you've been a student of the game and learning a lot of these principles through practice. I feel like there's a lot of golden nuggets in what you've shared, but I really appreciate your time today. And thanks from our audience too, for being willing to share the lessons before your 1 p.m. traditional meeting time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.